The words still echo in my memory. This is elder abuse, screamed not in pain or concern, but in anger over money. Few wounds cut deeper than being abandoned in your weakest hour, only to be treated as a burden or a wallet instead of a parent. Betrayal like that does more than break trust. It fractures the very idea of family. And when the betrayal comes from the one you sacrificed everything for, the silence left behind is heavier than any stroke or scar. Yet in that silence, the truth rises. Blood may connect, but loyalty defines. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I have lived 62 Christmases, and most of them were loud, warm, and filled with the smells of roasted turkey and pine. This year, the house was quiet, except for the hum of the furnace. Ironically, one of the first models I designed when I was still crawling my way out of the technician's van and into the office of my own company. Whitaker Home Systems had grown from a one-man repair outfit into a respected local business in Cleveland, Ohio. For 3 decades, I had poured every ounce of myself into it, expanding from basic heating units into smart security systems that kept families warm and safe in long Midwest winters. Those efforts added up to almost $3 million in assets, the business itself, my modest home in the suburbs, a lakeside cabin by Erie, and a portfolio of cautious investments. I was proud of what I had built, not because it made me rich, but because it proved that persistence mattered. Still, pride felt hollow when I looked around the living room that December. My wife had been gone for more than 10 years, and my only son, Evan, had grown into a man I barely recognized. At 32, he spoke like a motivational speaker on social media, throwing around words like financial freedom and legacy, but most of his so-called success rested on my checkbook. I had paid his tuition when he tried an MBA, covered his credit cards when he fancied himself a real estate investor, and even shouldered his back taxes when he miscalculated a deal. Each time I told myself it was a father's duty, that one day he would steady himself and learn the value of sweat. Evan had other ideas. He posted carefully staged photos with his girlfriend, Amber, flashing cocktails in rooftop bars or skis at Vail. He promised his online followers he was grinding toward greatness, yet every month he leaned on me for rent. I tried to excuse it as youth, but as I decorated the porch with lights that December, I knew the truth. He didn't see family as a foundation. He saw it as a resource. Christmas had always been sacred in our house. Every year I attended the service at St. Mark's, shared dinner afterward, and replayed old VHS tapes where Evan as a boy tore into wrapping paper while his mother laughed beside him. Those rituals stitched our lives together long after she passed. This year I strung the lights higher, hoping perhaps Evan might feel guilt and show up if he saw the house glowing on his drive back from the city. I set the dining table for 2, placed our worn copy of It's a Wonderful Life near the TV, and kept the cocoa simmering. By mid-afternoon, a text pinged on my phone. Booked with content shoots for my channel, Dad. Can't make dinner. Merry Christmas, though. Attached was a photo of him in a velvet jacket, holding a glass above the twinkling skyline. My chest sank. I typed, "Be safe," and set the phone face down. I sat at the table alone, chewing roast beef that tasted of nothing. The lights blinked cheerfully around me, mocking in their insistence that this was a season of joy. To distract myself, I turned on the old VHS tapes. Grainy images flickered. Evan at 6, wearing a Santa hat too big for his head, squealing when he opened a toy truck, his mother leaning against my shoulder, whispering, "He's got your stubbornness." The sound of our laughter filled the room like ghosts. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the empty seat across from me, and for the first time felt a cold deeper than the December air outside. Neighbors checked in with polite gestures. Mrs. Alvarez from across the street left a container of chicken soup at my door, saying her grandchildren had insisted on sharing. My employees sent texts. Nate, the lead installer, wrote, "Merry Christmas, boss. We've got you covered if any furnaces break tonight. Tasha, my receptionist who juggled 2 jobs to raise her daughter, sent a picture of the little girl in reindeer pajamas. Deshaun, our newest apprentice, wrote a clumsy but heartfelt thank you for giving him a chance. Their kindness warmed me briefly, but it also sharpened the contrast. They remembered me, yet my own son found family traditions a burden. I poured another cup of cocoa, let the carols play from the radio, and sat in the glow of the tree. Outwardly, everything looked festive, but inside I felt a fissure opening. I wondered how long loyalty could be assumed just because of blood. My company survived because my crew showed up even in blizzards, because Mrs. Alvarez trusted me to fix her heating 2 decades ago, because clients knew I would keep promises. Loyalty had always been my currency. As I looked at Evan's glittering photograph again, it struck me that he had never deposited a dime into that account. He had only withdrawn. That Christmas Eve ended with me alone on the couch, the VHS still running, the house quiet. I told myself tomorrow would be different, but in the hollow silence I already suspected the truth. Something was about to give, and when it did, I would have to decide whether blood alone was enough to define family. If you're still watching and feel the sting of being overlooked like this, comment number 1 below so I know you're with me. Now, let's step into the moment everything began to unravel. Christmas Eve had always been my anchor. Even after my wife's passing, I clung to the service at St. Mark's Church like it was a rope tying me to the old life we had built together. The carols, the smell of wax candles, the children in angel costumes, it all steadied me. That night, though, while the congregation lifted their voices in "O come all ye faithful," a strange fog pressed down on me. My vision blurred, the words tangled on my tongue, and my right arm slid uselessly against the pew. At first I thought it was exhaustion, but when my knees buckled, I knew something worse had arrived. Hands caught me before I hit the floor. I heard someone shouting for help. The panicked voices of choir members, the rush of feet. Sirens followed minutes later. In the haze, I glimpsed the stained glass window of Mary cradling the infant Jesus as paramedics strapped me to a gurney. The irony was not lost on me. The holiest night of the year, and I was being carried away, half my face slack, my words locked behind clenched teeth. At the Cleveland Clinic, fluorescent lights replaced candlelight. Machines beeped around me. A nurse pressed cold leads onto my chest. Another adjusted my oxygen. I tried to speak, but only a garbled sound came out. "Minor stroke," I overheard one doctor mutter. "First 72 hours are critical." My heart pounded not only from fear, but from the realization of how fragile my body had become. I drifted in and out of consciousness, catching fragments of conversation. A nurse asked for my emergency contact. "His son is listed first," she said. I wanted to nod, to assure them Evan would come, but my body betrayed me. They called, once, twice, over and over, 17 times in total, as I learned later. Not a single answer, no text returned. The line between father and stranger had never felt so sharp. When I finally woke fully, the room was quiet except for the monitors. My throat burned, my limbs weak. A tray sat beside me, untouched soup left by someone. A small note rested on top. "Prayers for your healing, Mrs. Alvarez." My neighbor had walked through the cold to bring food to a man barely conscious. I whispered a thank you, though no one was there to hear it. Later, a young nurse brought my phone to me. My fingers trembled as I unlocked it. The screen flooded with images. Evan and Amber in veil, ski poles slung across their shoulders, champagne glasses raised. The caption read, "Christmas freedom, new traditions." Comments overflowed with fire emojis and congratulations. To them, he was a man building a glamorous life. To me, he was my son who had written his absence as a celebration of liberation. I stared at the photo until the edges of the screen blurred with tears. Freedom from what? From me? From the obligation of sitting at the bedside of the man who had built the very ground he stood on? The humiliation cut deeper than the stroke. I had fought through ice storms, double shifts, and years of widowhood to give him everything. And on the night I needed him most, he broadcasted to the world that he was free. The staff tried to reassure me. A nurse patted my shoulder and said, "Don't worry, sir, you've had visitors." She listed them: Mrs. Alvarez dropping by again, Nate from my crew checking on company matters, Tasha leaving a card signed with her daughter's crayon drawing of a snowman. Their names steadied me like scaffolding. They were not blood, but they were present. As night deepened, I lay awake, the beeps of machines filling the silence. My body was weak, my speech slurred, but my mind sharpened with each passing hour. Blood, I realized, guaranteed relation, but not loyalty. The faces that appeared at my bedside were the ones who chose to come, not the one who was obligated by birth. That thought burned like both wound and warning. I closed my eyes, replaying Evan's post. Christmas freedom. The words rattled inside me, hollow and triumphant. If freedom to him meant turning away from me, then perhaps I too needed to free myself. From illusions, from blind loyalty, from the assumption that inheritance and blood made a family. My stroke had knocked me down, but it had also peeled back the truth. And that truth would not be ignored much longer. If you're still watching and can sense the tension building, drop a number 2 in the comments to show you're following closely. Now, let's see what happens when the first crack turns into a break. Christmas morning should have carried the warmth of hymns and cinnamon rolls, but in the hospital it felt sterile, heavy with antiseptic and beeping monitors. I had made it through the first critical night after the stroke, my body still weak, my right hand trembling each time I tried to lift the water cup. A social worker visited just after sunrise, clipboard in hand. She asked about medical directives, whether I had given anyone power of attorney for health decisions. I shook my head. For years I had assumed Evan would naturally step in, the way blood was supposed to. Her frown told me assumptions meant little in a crisis. As she left, my phone lit up with an incoming FaceTime. Evan's face filled the screen, ruddy from mountain air, ski goggles pushed to his forehead. Behind him I glimpsed Amber laughing with friends, the snow a dazzling backdrop. His tone was cheerful, almost too bright. "Hey, Dad, still talking okay?" "Good. Just wanted to check before we head to the slopes." I rasped that I had suffered a stroke, that the doctors were monitoring me closely. He paused, but only for a breath, before asking, "So if things, take a turn, are accounts going to be locked up? I've got deposits due for New Year's events and plane tickets. Don't want things frozen?" He rattled off numbers like an accountant, catering balances, venue fees, rental charges. I lay there, IV dripping into my arm, listening to my son prioritize party logistics over my survival. I didn't answer. The silence stretched until he said, "Anyway, glad you're stable. Just, make sure the bank won't mess with cash flow." Then he grinned, lifted his ski pole for the camera, and the call ended. The screen went black, reflecting my own gaunt face, the slack side of my mouth still recovering. I set the phone aside, my chest tight with humiliation. An hour later, Nate appeared, his work boots squeaking against the polished floor. He carried a modest bouquet from the grocery store and looked almost embarrassed as he set it on the table. "Hang in there, boss. Shop's running fine." His visit was brief, but it carried more weight than all of Evan's words. Tasha came after lunch, juggling a binder of client orders. She had reorganized everything, so I only had to nod yes or no. She smiled, telling me her daughter had drawn a snowman for me. The child's crayon colors brightened the bland room more than any machine could. By evening, Mrs. Alvarez shuffled in, bundled in her heavy coat, rosary in hand. She prayed softly in Spanish, her fingers wrapping mine as though to lend me her strength. I couldn't speak much, but my eyes must have told her how grateful I was. Each of them had shown up without obligation, without inheritance to gain. They came because they cared. When they left, I picked up my phone again, scrolling through Evan's feed. Another photo had appeared, him and Amber clinking glasses in a ski lodge. The caption read, "No drama Christmas." I stared until the words blurred. To him, my stroke was drama, an inconvenience interrupting his curated freedom. Anger rose, sharper than any physical pain. I thought back to the years of wiring him money, the failed condo flip, the back taxes I covered, the loans I forgave, all of it reduced to a transaction, all of it taken for granted. He saw me not as a father, but as a bank with a weakening password. I called Harold that night, my old friend and retired attorney from church. His voice was steady, even comforting. I told him everything, and he grew quiet. Then he said, "Sam, you need to get your estate in order right now." Without a clear will or a power of attorney, Evan could step in by default. You don't want that. His words settled heavy on my chest, but they also gave me clarity. The next day, Harold called back with something chilling. He had checked his office messages and found records showing that Evan had already scheduled a mobile notary to come to my house on Christmas Eve. The paperwork? A financial power of attorney form, pre-filled with Evan's name. The only reason it hadn't gone through was because I had collapsed at church before the appointment. The revelation stunned me. My son had not only neglected me during crisis, he had planned to seize control of my accounts even before the stroke. Lying there in the hospital, I felt something inside harden. Blood had blinded me for too long. The evidence was now undeniable. Evan's loyalty was to himself, and he saw my life's work as his entitlement. I closed my eyes, the monitor beeping steadily at my side. For the first time since the stroke, I felt a flicker of resolve rather than weakness. The betrayal was clear, but so was my course of action. I would protect what I had built, from illness, from time, and most of all, from my own son. If you're still here and feel the weight of betrayal growing, write number 3 below to let me know you're walking through this with me. Now, let's dive into the first shocking confrontation. The day after Christmas dawned gray over Cleveland, snow crusted hard against the hospital windows. A physical therapist guided my hand through slow motions, coaxing stiff muscles back to life. Each movement was painful, but the ache reminded me I was still here, still capable of deciding the shape of my future. I had spent the night replaying Harold's revelation about the scheduled notary. My son had arranged to secure financial power of attorney before the stroke even happened. That knowledge pulsed in my chest more fiercely than the fatigue of therapy. Later that morning, my phone buzzed with a long message from Evan. He wrote that he would fly back tonight, though his words carried more warning than comfort. At the end, he added, "Don't sign anything without me." I stared at that line until it blurred. Even now, when I was fighting to walk and speak again, his concern wasn't for my recovery, but for the paperwork that might loosen his grip on my inheritance. I lay back, exhausted, and let the memories return. I thought of the time he bought a duplex with dreams of flipping it for profit. When the market turned, he called me in tears, and I emptied savings to cover his loss. I thought of the IRS notice I intercepted because he hadn't filed taxes correctly. I wrote the check so he wouldn't ruin his credit. I even remembered paying off his car loan after he begged for just one more chance. Every bailout had been an act of hope. Now, I saw them for what they were, stones stacked in the wall of his entitlement. That afternoon, Harold walked into my room carrying a leather folder. His calm presence steadied me. "Sam," he said, "we don't have time to waste. If you leave things as they are, Evan can step in by default. The law favors next of kin." He spread documents across the rolling table, valuation reports, asset summaries, legal forms. I listened as he detailed the numbers, nearly $2 million in the company, nearly $500,000 in the house, the cabin worth over $300,000, and investments totaling another $300,000. He tapped his pen against the page. "All of this is vulnerable unless you direct it." I asked him about options. His answer was firm. "A revocable trust gives you control while you're alive and shields assets from interference. An advance directive protects your medical choices. A no-contest clause discourages frivolous challenges. These aren't luxuries, Sam. They're necessities now." His words sank deep. For decades, I had believed love was enough, that family ties could never be questioned. But Harold was right. Paperwork mattered when loyalty failed. I asked him to leave the documents with me. That night, when the ward grew quiet, I studied every line. The terms felt foreign at first, but with each page I saw the outline of a fortress I could build. A fortress not against strangers, but against the son I had raised. Meanwhile, Evan's digital voice echoed in my ears. I opened my phone again and saw his latest post from Vale, a picture of him raising a glass near a fireplace, captioned, "No drama Christmas." My jaw clenched. To him, my illness was drama. My absence from the holiday a relief. He was rewriting the meaning of family for an audience of strangers who applauded his independence. I shut the phone, pulse racing. Alone in that hospital bed, I downloaded an estate planning app I had once ignored. My fingers moved slowly over the screen, clumsy from weakness, but I managed to open the section on trusts. Words like beneficiary, executor, and irrevocable filled the display. Each term was a reminder that I didn't have to surrender control. I could decide who truly deserved to inherit what I had built. When the nurse came to check my vitals, she found me awake, scribbling notes with my shaky hand. "Can't sleep?" she asked. I only smiled faintly. Sleep could wait. For the first time since the stroke, I felt more than a patient. I felt like a man taking back the pen that would write the ending of his story. By midnight, exhaustion overcame me, but I drifted off with a quiet sense of resolve. The path ahead was no longer clouded by sentiment. Evan had shown me where his loyalty lay. Now it was my turn to decide where mine would. If you're still watching and want to know how loyalty gets tested, type number 4 in the comments so I know you're hooked. Now let's uncover how the first attempt to fix things only makes it worse. On the morning of December 27th, I awoke to a nurse adjusting the IV drip, sunlight slanting across the sterile hospital room. My body still felt sluggish from the stroke, but my mind was alert. I sensed something was about to break. An hour later, Harold called with news that made my blood run cold. Evan had shown up at my company's office demanding access to credit cards, key codes, and company accounts. He hadn't even stopped by the hospital first. He had stormed into the building in his tailored jacket, waving his phone, telling anyone who would listen that he was the rightful heir and should be allowed to step in. Nate, steady as always, refused. "Unless I see something signed by Sam himself, nothing moves," he told him. That kind of loyalty reminded me why Nate had been with me nearly 2 decades. But Evan, faced with resistance, grew louder. He pulled out his phone, hit the live button, and began streaming. On camera, he ranted about manipulative employees taking advantage of an old man. He painted himself as the caring son locked out by scheming staff. The live stream quickly reached hundreds of viewers, but instead of sympathy, the comments turned hostile. People in our community knew me, knew the sacrifices I had made, the late-night repairs, the scholarships I had quietly funded. They knew Evan too, but only as the man who never worked a shift in his life. The backlash was swift. Disbelief, criticism, even laughter. Harold later told me the video did more damage to Evan's reputation than to mine. Still, the fact that my son had weaponized my company's name to stage a performance while I lay in a hospital bed left me shaking with fury. That afternoon, Amber appeared in my hospital room. Her eyes darted nervously, as if she expected to be scolded. She set a paper bag of pastries on the tray and said softly, "I'm sorry we weren't here on Christmas." Evan thought. Her words trailed off. I nodded, waiting. She rushed on. "He thought it would all be fine, that you'd pull through like always." Then, without realizing the weight of what she was admitting, she let slip that Evan had already put down a deposit for a New Year's Eve event under the company's name. "He said it would make sense once everything settled," she mumbled. I stared at her, pulse hammering. Everything settled. In other words, once I was gone. My son had not only abandoned me, but had already begun spending the reputation and resources of a company I had built brick by brick, as if my death were an inevitable formality. Amber bit her lip, realizing too late what she had revealed. She excused herself quickly, leaving the pastries untouched. The room spun with rage and clarity. Abandonment was one thing, but premeditated exploitation was another. My son wasn't just negligent. He was preparing to profit from my absence. My hands trembled, not from the stroke this time, but from fury. The betrayal was a knife, but it also carved away the last of my hesitation. I dialed Harold immediately. "We changed the will today," I said, voice gravelly but firm. "Not tomorrow, not next week, today." Harold didn't argue. He only reminded me of the steps we had to take: medical capacity evaluation, a notary present, airtight clauses to prevent contest. "If we rush, we leave holes," he warned. "But if we do this properly, Evan can scream all he wants and the law will not hear him. Then let's do it properly, I replied. But let's do it now. As we spoke, Harold mentioned something else he had uncovered, something that confirmed my worst fears. A lender had filed paperwork for a junior lien on my Lake Erie cabin, based on documents submitted in my name. The loan hadn't gone through only because no ID had been produced. Evan had tried to leverage my property, pretending to be me, before I even had the stroke. That knowledge burned hotter than fire in my chest. My son had been planning this for weeks, if not months. The hospital walls felt tighter, the air too thin. Yet beneath the anger was a steel clarity. The time for patience had ended. I had tolerated excuses, indulged whims, forgiven debts, all in the name of love. But love, when it blinds, becomes a weapon against yourself. I turned toward the window where snow blew sideways against the glass. The world outside was cold, ruthless, but honest. I realized I had to be the same. For the first time since the stroke, I felt no fear of dying. What terrified me was leaving my life's work in the hands of someone who saw it only as a trough to feed from. That I would not allow. When the nurse returned to check my vitals, she found me scribbling Harold's instructions onto a pad of paper, my hand unsteady but determined. She asked if I needed more rest. I shook my head. Rest could come later. I had a legacy to protect, and the clock was already running. December 28th arrived with brittle sunlight seeping through the hospital blinds. My body remained sluggish, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. The decision I had carried in silence now pressed like a weight on my chest. Harold walked in mid-morning, accompanied by a notary in a dark suit and a doctor I didn't recognize. Their presence made the air feel heavy, official, irreversible. The doctor introduced himself and began a series of quick tests. He asked me to recall a list of words, to name the president, to draw a clock face on a pad of paper. My right hand shook but managed the circle and the numbers. Then he asked me to sign my name twice. The letters looked uneven, but they were mine. He nodded, satisfied, and wrote a note confirming my capacity. "Mentally sound," he said firmly. Relief swept through me, though it was tinged with sadness that my own son had driven me to prove my clarity to strangers. The notary checked my identification, compared signatures, and positioned himself at the table. Harold had then unfolded the documents, sheet after sheet of carefully prepared paper. His voice was steady as he explained the new estate plan. "Sam, your company will be placed in a trust for the employees who stood by you. The house here in Cleveland goes to Mrs. Alvarez for her lifetime use, then to a local charity. The cabin by Lake Erie will be divided between Nate and Tasha. Your investments will fund a profit-sharing pool for staff. As for Evan," he paused, his eyes searching mine, "he will receive $25,000. That matches what you estimate you've already poured into his ventures." The words stung. A part of me wanted to argue, to say he was my son, that cutting him down to such a small sum was cruel. In the quiet hum of the machines, I heard my late wife's voice in memory. "Sam, family means forgiveness." She had always been the softer one, the one who believed love could mend everything. For a moment, my hand hovered over the pen, wavering. Was I betraying her vision of parenthood? Was I betraying my own instinct to protect my blood? But then I saw Evan's face as he toasted champagne in Vale, the caption mocking my struggle, "No drama Christmas." I remembered the 17 unanswered calls, the planned notary on Christmas Eve, the attempt to seize control of my cabin. Forgiveness was one thing, enabling was another. If I gave him everything, I would be telling him that betrayal had no consequence, that loyalty was meaningless. That was a lesson I refused to leave behind. I picked up the pen, my fingers trembling. Slowly, I scrawled my name across the line. The signature looked jagged, but it was mine. I signed the trust, the directives, the no contest clause. With each stroke, the burden shifted. It felt like both betrayal and liberation. Betrayal of the father, who once believed money would bind his son closer. Liberation from years of being treated as a bank instead of a man. When the last page was done, Harold placed his hand gently on mine. "This isn't revenge, Sam. It's stewardship. You're ensuring what you built lives on with those who earned it." His words steadied me, quieted the storm in my chest. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt control return to me. Just as the notary gathered the documents, Harold's phone rang. He stepped aside to answer, his brow furrowing. After a moment, he returned, voice tight. "Sam, you acted just in time. Evan was at a title office this morning, trying again to file paperwork as your representative. Because these documents are now active, his attempt collapsed immediately. They called to report suspected fraud." The news hit me like both a punch and a vindication. My son was relentless, even as I lay in a hospital bed recovering from a stroke. He had tried yet again to pry open the vault of my life's work. But the wall held because I had finally chosen to build it. I leaned back against the pillows, exhausted but certain. The line had been drawn. Blood alone no longer dictated the future of Whitaker Home Systems, or of my legacy. Loyalty would define it now. If you're still here and can feel the tension of this impossible decision, comment number 5 to show me you're ready. Now, let's witness the choice that changes everything. By the morning of December 29th, the snow outside had grown heavier, as if the city itself wanted to bury the chaos in silence. I had barely finished my breakfast tray when Harold arrived with the official notice. The estate changes had been filed and distributed to all concerned parties. That meant Evan had been formally notified. My stomach tightened. I knew my son well enough to predict the storm that would follow. It didn't take long. By early afternoon, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed in the hospital corridor. Evan burst into my room, face red, eyes blazing. "This is elder abuse," he shouted before I could say a word. His voice cracked the sterile calm of the ward. Nurses peered in, startled, while patients across the hall stirred at the noise. He jabbed a finger toward Harold, who stood calmly at the foot of my bed. "You're manipulating him. You and those greedy employees, taking advantage of his condition." I told him, my voice rough but steady, that the decision had been mine. "I passed every test, Evan. The doctor and the notary certified it." My words only seemed to inflame him further. He paced the room like a trapped animal, muttering about lawyers and lawsuits. Finally, he leaned close, his expression twisted. "If you think this is the end, you're wrong. I'll drag this through every court until I get what's rightfully mine." After he stormed out, I felt drained. Not from fear of his threats, but from the sorrow that pressed down like lead. I had imagined anger would dominate when this moment came, but instead I felt grief. My son wasn't just rejecting me. He was rejecting every lesson I had hoped to pass down, every sacrifice that had shaped his life. By evening, his anger spilled onto social media. Evan posted a long message claiming that I was being controlled by manipulative staff and opportunistic neighbors. He called himself the victim of systemic exploitation, portraying his father as too weak to think clearly. Within hours, the comments began pouring in. But unlike his live stream a few days earlier, this time the responses were overwhelmingly against him. Former clients of Whitaker Home Systems chimed in first. One wrote, "Sam kept my family warm during the blizzard of 2009 when no one else would come out. He's the sharpest man I know." Local business leaders added their voices, reminding the public that Evan had never once worked a shift at the company. Neighbors from our street, people who had seen me shovel snow in my 70s and fix their thermostats on Christmas Eve, posted messages of support. The tide of opinion turned swiftly and brutally against Evan. His post, intended to rally sympathy, became a wall of ridicule and shame. Back in the hospital, Mrs. Alvarez appeared again with a thermos of soup, her voice firm as she shook her head. "Your boy, he brings shame to himself, not to you," she said in her accented English. She placed the steaming bowl in my hands and patted my shoulder with the tenderness of someone who chose to be family. Later, Nate and Tasha arrived together. Nate carried a stack of paperwork, updates from the company, while Tasha handed me a card signed by nearly every employee. Inside, they had written words of encouragement, affirming that they stood with me no matter how ugly the battle became. Their solidarity wrapped around me like armor. Harold, ever the strategist, leaned close as the evening settled. "Sam, we'll need to prepare for more than lawsuits. If he continues with these accusations, we may face a defamation campaign. I'll begin drafting protective measures." His voice was calm, but I could see the steel beneath. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed with one final message from Evan. The words chilled me. If the courts won't listen, the media will. Everyone will know you've been exploited. I'll make sure your name is ruined before your body is cold. I set the phone down, my hand trembling not from the stroke, but from the weight of realization. This was no longer a private quarrel between father and son. The conflict had moved beyond family, into the public arena where reputation itself could be weaponized. The man I had once rocked to sleep now threatened to dismantle everything I stood for. I stared at the dark window, the snow still falling in thick, relentless sheets. My body was frail, but my resolve had never been stronger. The battle had begun in my veins with a stroke, but it would end in the open light where truth could be seen. Evan had chosen war, and I would answer, not with rage, but with the steady strength of a man who knew loyalty mattered more than blood. By December 30th, the hospital corridors had quieted, the Christmas decorations drooping a little under fluorescent lights. My body was stronger than it had been only days earlier, though fatigue clung to me like a shadow. I knew recovery would be slow, but my mind was sharp, steady, determined. Evan's threats and his latest online tirade had left scars, yet something unexpected was happening outside these sterile walls. The community was rallying. Harold arrived mid-morning with a briefcase brimming with papers. He explained that he had drafted a formal press statement, complete with supporting documents, to counter every false claim Evan had spread. The law will handle the lies, he said, but perception matters too. People need to hear the truth clearly. The truth, it seemed, was already speaking for itself. Local business leaders had begun posting their own testimonies about me. One longtime client described how I had once repaired her furnace for free during a blizzard when she couldn't afford the bill. Another recalled how Whitaker Home Systems sponsored community scholarships long before the company could comfortably afford them. Their words spread quickly online, undercutting Evan's narrative. Even more powerful were the voices of my employees. Nate posted a photo of the company workshop with the caption, "Sam built this with his bare hands and his honesty. No one manipulates him. We stand by our boss." Tasha followed with a long message describing the years she had watched me pay staff out of my own pocket during lean months. Her story struck a chord. The thread was shared hundreds of times. Neighbors, too, spoke up. Mrs. Alvarez gave a statement to a local reporter, telling them how I had fixed her heat when her grandchildren were sick, refusing to take money. Her voice quavered, but her conviction was unshakable. "This man is not weak," she said. "He is stronger than anyone I know. His son should be ashamed." Seeing her face on the evening news, defending me with more loyalty than my own blood, brought a sting of tears I didn't try to hide. Meanwhile, Harold filed cease and desist letters against Evan, citing defamation. Hospital staff provided signed documents confirming my mental clarity during every decision. Nate and Tasha signed sworn statements about Evan's behavior, his shouting in the office, his attempts to seize control. Each page added weight to the fortress being built around my estate. That evening, as the winter sun dipped early, I sat by the window and thought of my late wife. I imagined her sitting beside me, hands folded, reminding me that forgiveness was a virtue. I whispered into the quiet, "I tried, love. I really did." The ache of loss was sharper than the stroke had been. It was one thing to lose a wife to illness, but another to watch a son choose greed over love. Still, there was also relief. For the first time in years, I knew my legacy was secure. The company, the house, the cabin, the investments, they would sustain people who had earned them, not squandered by someone who saw me only as a stepping stone. Then came the final confirmation. Late that night, Harold returned with new evidence. Evan had emailed several employees directly, offering bribes if they would testify that I had been confused or incapacitated during my hospital stay. The bribes were generous: salary increases, vacation time, even promises of future management roles. But the emails never reached their intended effect. Each one had been forwarded immediately to Harold, accompanied by notes of disgust. "I could never betray Sam," Nate wrote. Tasha's message was even sharper. "If Evan thinks loyalty is for sale, he doesn't understand this company at all." When Harold laid those emails before me, I felt a strange stillness settle over my chest. The evidence was undeniable. Evan was not just careless or misguided, he was willing to fabricate lies, to corrupt others, to claw at what was never his by right. I had spent decades excusing him, telling myself youth or inexperience explained his behavior, but these emails stripped away the last of my illusions. I leaned back against the pillows, closing my eyes, breathing deeply. For the first time since the stroke, I allowed myself to release the idea that blood alone defined family. Family was Mrs. Alvarez praying at my bedside. Family was Nate refusing to hand over keys. Family was Tasha reorganizing client files so the business would keep moving. Family was Harold, steady and protective, placing each legal stone in place around me. I opened my eyes again and looked out at the snow swirling in the night. Evan had chosen his path, and I had chosen mine. The grief of losing him would never vanish, but it no longer ruled me. Ahead lay the work of recovery, the stewardship of a company, and the comfort of knowing that loyalty had triumphed where blood had failed. If you're still watching and sense that the storm is far from over, type number 6 in the comments, so I know you're with me. Now, let's see how the truth finally comes to light. New Year's Eve dawned pale and cold, the city coated in fresh snow that glittered beneath a weak sun. After 6 days in the hospital, I was finally discharged. The nurses wheeled me out with measured care, but I insisted on walking the last few steps to the waiting car. Each movement felt like a victory, proof that the stroke had not taken from me the will to stand. Harold drove me home, the silence between us steady and companionable. As the familiar streets slid past, I thought about how much had changed in a single week. 7 days earlier, I had been a man teetering between life and death. Now I was alive, my legacy secured, my illusions burned away. Evan's world, on the other hand, had collapsed. Over the last 2 days, the media had turned decisively against him. Local news stations ran features about Whitaker Home Systems, highlighting years of community service, scholarships, and free emergency repairs. The faces of neighbors and clients filled the screen, telling stories of kindness. One headline read, "Founder betrayed by son, defended by community." In every report, I was the man who had built something with integrity. Evan was the son who tried to dismantle it. His social circle shrank quickly. Friends who once clung to him for parties and favors distanced themselves. Business contacts stopped returning his calls. The final blow came from Amber. According to Harold, she had quietly packed her things and left after being ridiculed online for standing beside him. Her parents, pillars of their social community, no longer wanted their name entangled with his. Evan was alone, carrying the weight of his own arrogance. That afternoon, I gathered my strength and walked into the company's conference room, cane in hand. The employees filled the space, their faces eager, anxious. Nate stood near the door. Tasha clutched a folder of documents, and Mrs. Alvarez sat in the front row, eyes shining. Harold joined me at the head table, spreading out the official trust documents. My voice was unsteady at first, but it gained strength as I spoke. "This company is no longer mine alone," I said. "It belongs to the people who built it, who stood by me not only in times of success, but in the darkest hours. As of today, Whitaker Home Systems is an employee trust. You are no longer just staff. You are owners, stewards, and family." The room erupted in applause. Some clapped fiercely, others wiped away tears. Nate's broad shoulders shook as he bent his head, overwhelmed. Tasha beamed with pride. I saw in their faces the reflection of something I had always hoped for. Not wealth, not power, but continuity. My life's work would not vanish into the selfish hands of one man. It would live on through those who valued it. Then I turned toward Mrs. Alvarez and handed her a small box. Inside was a brass house key, polished until it gleamed. Her hands trembled as she held it. "For you," I told her, "the house that once was mine will be your home. You've earned more than just my gratitude. You've earned stability, the same way you gave me comfort when I was weakest." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she whispered blessings in Spanish, her voice breaking with emotion. The meeting ended in embraces, handshakes, and a shared meal delivered by employees who had insisted on catering it themselves. As the sun set, I remained in the conference room with this group I now called family. We ate, laughed, and remembered the battles of the week. Outside, fireworks began to burst in the distance, their colors faint against the winter sky. I sat quietly for a moment, letting the sound wash over me. There was grief, yes, a deep ache for the son I had lost, not to death, but to greed. But there was also pride and peace. I had found clarity in betrayal, strength in loyalty. Family was no longer defined by bloodlines, but by presence, by sacrifice, by love in action. As the clock ticked toward midnight, I lifted my glass of sparkling cider with the people who had earned my trust. To a new year, I said, and to a new kind of family. The room echoed the toast, and for the first time in many years, I felt at home. New Year's Day, morning broke quiet, the streets still muffled beneath snow. For the first time since my stroke, I awoke in my own bed rather than beneath hospital lights. My body was fragile, the stiffness in my arm a reminder of what had nearly claimed me, but my mind was alive with clarity. The last week had carried me through betrayal, grief, fury, and hard decisions, but today felt like the beginning of something different. I moved slowly through the house, cane tapping softly against the wooden floorboards. It struck me how changed this place felt. On the counter sat Mrs. Alvarez's old soup pot, left behind after she cooked for me while I was still recovering. Near the door leaned Nate's toolbox, where he had repaired a drafty window without asking for payment. On the desk rested Tasha's neatly stacked papers, reminders of how she had kept the company running while I lay unconscious. Each object was ordinary, yet together they told the story of a new kind of family, chosen not by blood but by loyalty. The ache for Evan remained. No matter what he had done, he was my son. I thought of his face as a child, flushed from sledding, his mittened hand clinging to mine. The image hurt more than any of his recent betrayals. But grief, I realized, was part of love. And love, when refused, could not be forced. My son had chosen greed, and in doing so, he had severed the bond that years of sacrifice had not. That wound would never fully close, but it would not define me either. I poured myself coffee, the mug warm between hands that still trembled slightly. Outside, the world was silent, the snow catching the pale light of morning. I thought of the words that had carried me through the darkest nights. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. Over the past week, I had lived that truth. Evan had abandoned me, but others had stood by without hesitation. In their actions, I saw the real inheritance of my life: compassion, responsibility, and trust. As I sipped the coffee yisa, I remembered Harold's final call the night before. His voice was steady, carrying both relief and finality. Evan had left town quietly. No lawsuit had been filed, no further accusations made. Rumor had it he was seeking work out of state, stripped of his reputation and isolated from the friends who once flocked to his wealth. Justice had not come through courts or punishment. It had arrived through the collapse of his own arrogance. Sometimes, Harold said, a man destroys himself faster than any enemy could. That thought settled over me like a blanket. I did not need revenge. Watching Evan's schemes crumble under the weight of truth was enough. My role was not to chase him, but to protect what remained, to tend the soil where loyalty had already taken root. Later that afternoon, I sat in the living room with Mrs. Alvarez, Nate, and Tasha. They had come to check on me, bringing bread, laughter, and quiet strength. We ate simply, a meal more nourishing than any feast. As fireworks from the night before echoed faintly in memory, I realized that peace had returned, not the peace of ignorance, but the peace of acceptance. I lifted my cup again and made a silent vow. This year, I live on my terms, I whispered, the words steady despite the weakness in my body. No more illusions, no more blind indulgence. My legacy would not be squandered on entitlement. It would be carried forward by those who had already proven their devotion when I had nothing left to give. As dusk fell, I watched the snow outside, each flake falling with deliberate grace. Life, I thought, is like that snowfall, fragile, fleeting, but capable of covering the world in quiet beauty. My story had nearly ended on Christmas Eve, but instead it had turned into a lesson. Betrayal had shown me the true worth of loyalty. Greed had revealed the strength of integrity, And even in loss, I had found a family worth keeping. The year ahead would not be easy, but it would be mine, and that was enough. Life often tests us in ways that cut deeper than illness or age. What wounds the spirit most is not the body's frailty, but the realization that trust can be misplaced, that devotion offered freely can be met with disregard. Yet, within those same trials lie opportunities to rediscover what truly endures. Betrayal, as painful as it is, has a strange clarity. It strips away illusions, silences falsehoods, and forces the heart to see with sharper vision. In the ruins of disappointment, one begins to measure family not by bloodline, but by presence, not by promises, but by actions carried out in the quiet hours when no one is watching. The truth is that loyalty is rarely dramatic. It doesn't appear with applause or headlines. Instead, it emerges in the small gestures, a hand that steadies you when you falter, a word of reassurance when doubt creeps in, a willingness to sit in silence simply to prove you are not alone. These moments, humble and unremarkable to the outside eye, become pillars strong enough to hold a life together when storms come. When the heart is broken by abandonment, it is these pillars that remind us there is still ground beneath our feet. We live in a world obsessed with wealth, inheritance, and appearances. Yet time reveals that none of these hold lasting value without integrity to anchor them. Money can vanish, property can change hands, reputations can be smeared, but the weight of character endures. The measure of a life is not in what is accumulated, but in how it is shared, in the constancy of devotion shown to others. Legacy is not a ledger of assets. It is the echo of values lived daily, the way others remember kindness, fairness, and resilience long after the accounts have been settled. Loss can feel final, as though something essential has been taken that can never be restored. But sometimes loss is also liberation. When false ties dissolve, what remains is the chance to rebuild on stronger ground. One learns that dignity lies not in clinging to what corrodes, but in choosing deliberately who and what deserves preservation. Peace arrives not by winning battles against those who harm us, but by walking forward free of their shadow, carrying only the lessons they unwillingly provided. The heart inevitably aches when bonds of blood prove fragile, but wisdom is born in that ache. It teaches that love cannot be demanded or purchased. It must be chosen and nurtured. And when it is absent, when self-interest replaces affection, the path is clear. Release what diminishes you and invest in what sustains you. The family we are born into may not always protect us, but the family we build through loyalty and care becomes unshakable. In the end, survival is not the same as living. To truly live is to guard one's integrity, to reward loyalty, and to leave behind a legacy that inspires rather than burdens. Illness and betrayal may take much, but they cannot strip away the strength of clarity. From that clarity comes renewal, the courage to define life by conviction rather than circumstance. So, let the past carry its own weight, and let tomorrow carry promise. The lessons carved in hardship remind us that strength is found not in control over others, but in stewardship of what is right. Family is more than shared blood. It is shared loyalty. Legacy is more than wealth. It is the proof that one's life added light to the world. And peace is more than survival. It is the quiet assurance that, whatever storms may come, values lived with honor will always outlast betrayal. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.